Welcome to Trial of the Hollywood Sex Therapist Killer, the harrowing and tragic story of Dr. Amie Harwick, who met a tragic end when she was allegedly thrown off her third-floor balcony by her stalker and ex-boyfriend, Gareth Pursehouse. Found clinging to life, but later succumbing to her injuries, Amie's death has raised many questions, with answers to be revealed in court. Join us as we dive deep into the ongoing trial of Gareth Pursehouse, the man accused of this heinous act, and as we seek justice for Amie.
Number 14. Is that a close-up of the stain that you just testified to?
Yes.
Did you also conduct a phenolphthalein screening test on this stain?
On this stain, I did not.
Why not?
The stain I tested right before this was only probably about maybe a foot apart or less. I didn't feel the need to test it. The stain was in close proximity to the other stain that was tested. And the type of stain looked similar, so I didn't test it.
Did you collect this swab of this particular stain?
I did.
Now, did you see any other stains in the vicinity of these French doors that necessitated your collection?
I did.
And what was that?
That would be labeled as photo ID 13. It was a stain on the floor.
I'm showing you what was previously marked as People's 87. And I'm pointing to an evidence marker on the left here. I know the number is not appearing. But is that where the stain is that you observed near the French door area on the floor?
Yes.
Showing you 87. C. Are you able to see that stain more closely in 87C?
Yes.
Now, taking a look at this stain on the floor, did you conduct your phenolphthalein screening test on this stain?
I did.
And what was the indication based on that screening test?
It was positive.
As a result of that, did you then take a swab of this particular stain?
Yes.
Now I'm going to turn your attention to the upstairs area of the home. Did you proceed with your walkthrough of the upstairs area of the home?
Yes, I did.
Were items located on the second floor in which you collected?
Yes.
Now, were one of those items a jacket with evidence marker number 15?
Yes.
And was another one of those items a cross with metal beads as evidence marker number 16?
Yes.
And were those collected by you or by Detective Francis?
Both 15
I'm sorry,
and...
not Detective,
Yeah.
Miss Francis, I apologize.
Both 15 and 16 were collected by Francis.
And you were present during that collection, is that correct?
I was.
Showing you what's been marked as People's 89A. Is 15 the jacket I'm pointing to with my finger?
Yes.
And 16 is in the middle portion of the photograph, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, was there biological samples that were collected in the hallway of the area that I just showed you?
There was a sample collected. I don't know if it was biological.
Showing you what's been marked as People's 91A with an evidence marker of 17. Is this the evidence collection that took place in the hallway area?
Yes.
Now, you said you don't know about biological. What did you mean by that?
It didn't appear to be a blood stain, but it was an area that was wet. And my thought was it could be urine, but there's no test for urine. So I went ahead and I just collected it.
Why did you believe it could be urine?
Because walking through it, I remember it being kind of like a little bit sticky. If you walk through urine, it gets sticky, sometimes on bathroom floors. So that's why I thought to myself, I don't think this is water, it's something else. Maybe it's urine. So that led me to collect the sample.
And was that collected by you?
17 was collected by me.
And how did you go about collecting this sample?
I collected this sample just as I would blood. So I used a cotton swab, sterile water, just swab the area with the swab, tried to collect what was on the floor onto the swab. Now
I'm going to show you another photograph. Did you also collect any evidence in the bedroom area upstairs?
I did, yes.
And in what area did you collect evidence in? Well, let me be more specific. I'm showing you what's been marked as People's 93. Do you recognize this area?
I do.
Do you see the evidence marker of 19?
Yes,
Did you collect evidence from this area?
I did.
Showing you what's been marked as 93B. Can you describe what it is that was collected in this area?
I'm going to refer to my notes on that. So 19 was a red stain.
And did you conduct your phenolphthalein screening test in this instance?
Yes,
Was there a positive indication of blood?
there was.
Did you then swab it in the same process which you described earlier?
I did.
Now, did you notice any other stains that may have appeared to be blood in the vicinity?
I did not.
Now, there are other swabs that were taken from the upstairs area, is that correct?
Yes,
I'm showing you what's been previously marked as People's 94 with an evidence marker of 20.
yes.
Was there a swab taken of this vanity area?
There was, mostly from the handle areas of this dresser.
And why is that?
Again, I'm trying to collect what we call possible biological material. So if someone had opened the dresser drawers, and there's always a possibility that they could leave DNA there.
I'm showing you what's been previously marked as People's 95A. Did you also swab this area?
Yes,
And why did you swab this area?
same reason, an attempt to collect possible biological material.
Now, in regards to possibly finding biological material, was this done at the direction of detectives or something that you or Ms. Francis felt was necessary to collect?
It's something we felt was necessary to collect. It's pretty standard when you're working a crime scene like this.
So, is every item of evidence you collect directed by detectives?
No, sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's at my direction.
I'm showing you what's been marked as People's 96A. Do you recognize that?
I do.
Now, that depicts evidence markers 22 and 23. Were
Yes,
swabs taken of this area?
yes.
Why is that?
Using some of the testing we have available to us, we had what we believe to be semen stains, both where 22 is and where 23 is.
And what made you come to that conclusion?
I remember going into the bedroom and seeing the bed was undone. And my first thought was, it's possible somebody was in the bed, they may be waiting for her. So we thought, if this person
Checked
waiting,
as to foundation and speculation.
Overrule, I mean, is it because of the way that you were thinking you undertook some action?
yes,
Okay, well, it's not being offered for the truth, but it explains why he undertook some subsequent conduct. Go ahead.
just because of the type of crime it was, my thought was, if somebody was there waiting for the victim to return home, it's possible he was masturbating in the bed. So my thought as a criminalist, someone who works crime scenes, was, I'm going to look for semen. So we checked the bed and the area surrounding the bed for semen.
And how did you go about checking for that?
We use something called an alternate light source. It's almost like a black light. Using colored goggles and a black light, the semen will kind of like, it'll kind of glow or fluoresce, and then that gives us an indication that that might be semen. If I get that, I'll follow that up with something called an AP test, which is a chemical test for semen.
And because of that testing and the alternative light source you used, you took swabs of those two areas?
I did, yes.
And I'm showing you what's been previously. Well, did you go onto the balcony of the bedroom area?
I did,
And was evidence collected in the balcony area?
yes.
I'm showing you what's been previously marked as People's 29A. Do you recognize this area?
I do,
Is that the balcony area you went to connecting to the bedroom of the upstairs?
yes.
Showing you a close-up of the balcony of 29C. Do you recognize what's depicted there?
I do.
Did you collect that particular item of evidence?
That was collected by me, yes.
Was there any subsequent testing done in regards, or swabbing done in regards to this particular syringe?
Yes.
And what kind of swabbing was done?
Again, I attempted to collect possible biological material from the outside of the syringe
And how did you go about doing that?
using a cotton swab and sterile water, applying that to the syringe, swabbing the syringe, trying to collect what might be there. That's the way that was done.
And how is this particular item packaged in comparison to the swabs that we've been talking about?
Because it's a syringe and it's sharp, it went into, I don't even know what they're called, but they're plastic tubes that are very sturdy, and they're thick and strong, so the needle won't penetrate, which makes it safer for us to handle and carry it once we collect it.
Of the items that we discussed, evidence that was marked 1 through 19, were these all booked into evidence by you?
Yes. 1 through 19. No.
What items were booked into, well, let me ask you this. What about evidence items 6 to 19? Was that booked by you?
For the record,
Yes.
this is refreshing his recollection.
All right, again, if you need to look at your report, just advise the court of that.
Okay, I'm going to refer to my notes.
All right.
Starting with number 6, that was booked in the property by me. 7 was booked by me. 8 was booked by me. 9 and 10 were booked by me. 11 were booked by me. 12 was not booked, but it was not booked. 13 was not booked. 14 was not booked. 15 was booked by me. 16 and 17 were booked by me. 18 was booked by me. 19 was not booked.
And the ones where you say that you were not booked, were those the specific swabs that were taken by you that were not booked by you?
Those were the red stains that I collected.
That was booked by a law enforcement officer?
Yes,
But the remaining items were in fact booked by you?
they were.
And that was under a particular DR number, is that correct?
Yes,
And that DR number that it was booked under was specifically DR number 2006-06220, is that correct?
that's correct.
And were those items given to law enforcement at a later date?
The blood stains were transferred to a detective the next day, I believe it was.
And was that Detective Carranza?
Yes.
Thank you, nothing further.
That's examination.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sanchez.
Good afternoon.
While you were working as a criminalist, you had additional duties other than field investigation, correct?
Yeah, at that particular time on that day?
Just during your career there.
Yes.
And part of that was also DNA analysis?
Some of it was, yes.
And so you were, it seems like, more familiar with what potential evidence you could find.
Yes.
Okay, and when we're talking about possible biologic material, is that also referred to as touch DNA?
It is, yes.
Okay. And in this case, you stated that you and Miss Francis were wearing gloves the entire time?
Yes.
And why is it that you wear gloves?
Well, there's 2 reasons. Number 1, I want to protect the DNA. I don't want to contaminate the DNA, or let me back up. I don't want to contaminate the evidence with my DNA. That's reason number 1. But also number 2, they're biological fluids, so I want to protect myself from the evidence.
And as you were walking through with detectives, did you notice if any of the detectives were wearing gloves at the time?
I didn't notice.
Did you notice if anyone at the crime scene other than you and Miss Francis were wearing gloves?
Francis and I were wearing gloves, and the photographers were wearing gloves.
Okay, so anyone outside of the criminals who were there, you didn't notice whether or not they were wearing gloves?
No.
Do you recall how many people were in the house when you arrived?
Well, when I arrived, no, I don't.
So you said that the swabs that you took looking for potential touch DNA, you and Ms. Francis felt that those were important samples to take.
Yes.
And that was in part based on the location they were, that you thought someone may have touched those areas.
Yes.
Did you notice any stains or anything else that looked like it could be biological material on the stairs leading up to the upper level?
I did not see any blood leading up the stairs, no.
And you noted that in the hallway there were beads, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you see those beads in any other area of the house?
Well, they were kind of scattered out in the hallway upstairs. So they were in more than just one location. They were kind of spread out.
Okay, and that included into the bedroom, correct?
I believe some of them were in the bedroom, yes.
Now, you went on the balcony, and that was where the syringe was collected?
Yes.
And you said you spoke with law enforcement officers, so you were aware of where Ms. Harwick had been found?
Yes.
Okay, so is it safe to say that the balcony was a pretty important area during your search for evidence?
Yes.
But there were no swabs taken for potential touch DNA on any of the railings, correct?
Correct.
Referring back. What was previously marked as People's 93A. This is the doorknob in Ms. Hart's bedroom, correct?
Yes.
And looking at 93B, are you able to point? Let me see if I can go in here. I believe there's a yardstick behind you. Are you able to point out where the smudge is that you thought was possibly blood?
I can't see it on the photo, but it was in this area here.
Was there anything?
And for the record, he pointed above the doorknob on the white portion of the frame of the French door.
Over to the right of the number 19.
To the right of the scale, yes.
Was there anything collected from the doorknob?
No.
So you collected for potential touch DNA with the particular door that led out to the balcony. There was no swabbing for potential touch DNA.
Correct.
You have just a moment, Norman.
Yes.
You went through the entirety of the house, correct?
Yes.
And do you recall going through the kitchen?
I do, yes.
And on the cabinets in the kitchen are white, correct?
I don't remember.
Give me just a moment. Would it refresh your recollection to see an image of the kitchen?
Yes.
Yes. As you were going through the kitchen, did you note any staining or anything else that seemed like it might be biological material?
No.
And when you were briefed by law enforcement, were you told at any point that they believed the person who had been in the residence left through the kitchen door?
I don't recall that.
Do you recall if you took any swabs for potential touch DNA anywhere in the kitchen?
Not in the kitchen, no.
And this has previously been marked as defense U. Is this the kitchen you recall walking through?
Yes.
Okay, and the cabinets in there, both above and below the sink, are white?
Yes.
Okay, and as you walked through, there was nothing that drew your attention to any type of possible biologic material?
Correct.
And everything the prosecutor went over as far as samples that were taken and potential blood stains, that was everything that you noted while you were in the house?
Yes.
No further questions.
Yes, sir. You were asked about whether you collected any sort of swabbing from the railing.
Yes.
Did you look on the railing to see if there was anything that necessitated your collection?
I did.
Did you see anything that may have appeared to be blood?
No.
Did you see anything that may have appeared to be biological material that needed collection on that railing?
No.
Did you also take a look at the kitchen door?
Take a look at the kitchen door. Well, we entered and went through the kitchen door, but I don't recall seeing anything specific there.
Now I want to turn your attention to the specific French doors, which included the evidence marker of 19. And you were asked about the doorknob and whether you did any swabbing of the doorknob depicted there.
Yes.
Now, did you see any sort of indication of blood on the doorknob?
Not on the doorknob, no.
Did you see any other biological material that may have necessitated your collection on that doorknob?
No.
But you did see something above the doorknob that you collected and swabbed, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you were asked briefly about touch DNA. Are you less likely to collect biological material from a swab like touch DNA if a person was wearing gloves?
I would say no, but like there used to be this saying, never say never. But if it happened, it would be very rare.
It'd be pretty unlikely to get
Pretty
touch
unlikely,
DNA.
yeah.
I'm sorry, touch DNA from someone wearing gloves.
Yeah.
So if someone were to touch the doorknob that is depicted in the People's Exhibit on the screen right now wearing gloves, you wouldn't expect to see touch DNA, is that correct?
I would not.
Same thing with the railing.
Yes.
Thank you, nothing further.
Anything based on those questions?
Briefly, is there any specific research or any studies that you're basing your opinion you wouldn't see as much touch DNA when someone's wearing gloves?
There is research. I can't name it off the top of my head, but my answer also comes from 20 years in DNA.
And are you familiar with any of the recent publications in the Journal of Forensics regarding touch DNA being transferred by gloves?
Objection outside the scope of
Overruled.
The foundation, if the witness knows that.
I don't know. Well, then we'll find out. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with any specific articles. No.
And when you were swabbing the vanity, was there anything that you were able to see?
Yes.
What was it you were able to see?
I was able to see the drawers pull open, which led me to swab those areas.
Okay, with specifically regard to the areas that you swabbed, were you able to see anything that you thought was biological material?
No.
And that's because touch DNA is not visible to the eye generally.
Correct.
So if someone had touched anything on the balcony and you said never say never, DNA was transferred, you would not have been able to see it, correct?
You would not be able to see touch DNA on the balcony, no.
And the same with the doorknob.
Same with the doorknob.
Were you told at any point while you were on scene that officers believed whoever had broken in was wearing gloves?
objection, hearsay, outside the scope of the reading.
It would explain his conduct.
I don't recall anyone I don't recall any detective saying he may have been wearing gloves, no.
And that was, I apologize, you said that they did not say that.
I don't recall anybody saying that to me, no.
No further questions.
Any?
No.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break. Will, please. We are back on the record in this matter. People, you may call your next witness.
The people call Dr. Scott Lucy.
This is the coroner.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Dr. Luzzi? Yes, if you could approach the witness, stand down there, please. You could raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly state that the testimony you're about to give and the cause now pending before this court should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please have a seat. Please state and spell both your first and last name.
Scott, S-C-O-T-T, Luzzi, L-U-Z-I.
All right, counsel.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a contract forensic pathologist with Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office.
And what is your background, training, experience that qualifies you to be a forensic pathologist?
After medical school, I did a year's internship in general medicine, and then I did a 4-year residency in anatomic and clinical pathology, and then I did a year's fellowship in forensic pathology. I'm board certified in anatomic and clinical pathology and in forensic pathology.
Now, when conducting an autopsy, can you explain, just generally, the process in which it is done?
So the way it works at Los Angeles County is the case gets assigned in the morning, and I'll review the case notes from the investigator. After that, I'll review, usually there's x-rays and photographs that have been taken, so I review those before I even see the body up close. The first step of doing the autopsy is doing what's called an external examination, where we document the general characteristics of the individual, their hair color, height, weight, and then we also try to identify any injuries that they may have sustained in the autopsy, or during that autopsy. After the external examination, we do the internal examination, where we open up the torso and the head, and we look for disease and injuries within the body.
Now, in conducting your external and internal examinations, is your process, the observations, and the conclusions that you make documented into a report?
Yes.
And are those reports made in the regular course of your duties?
Yes.
And are they made near and or at the time of the actual autopsy?
Yes.
And does that report accurately reflect your observations and your conclusions?
Yes.
Now, did you conduct an autopsy of the decedent by the name of Amie Harwick with coroner case number 2020-01406?
Yes.
When was that autopsy conducted?
So it was on 17 February 2020.
Was that at 10 a.m.?
Yes.
Were photos taken of the decedent by a coroner investigator prior to you conducting your post-mortem examination?
So they were taken by the autopsy technician prior to my examination.
Did you look at those photos prior to autopsy?
I honestly don't remember if I did for this case.
And in accordance with your testimony in regards to the process that you undertake in conducting a post-mortem examination, did you do an external examination?
Yes.
Did you do an internal examination?
Yes, I did.
And those observations were documented in that report?
Yes.
Now I'm showing you what's been previously marked as People's 30. Is this a decedent in which you conducted a post-mortem examination?
Yes.
Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about some processes that you undergo when doing an examination. Is there blood collected from the decedent?
Yes.
And what types?
So we collect central, usually blood from the heart. And we collect peripheral, usually blood from the femoral artery or femoral vein in the legs. Also, we collect a third tube of blood for identification purposes, in case we have to do DNA testing to identify the individual.
And was such done in this instance?
Yes.
Do you also submit the blood that you collect for toxicology purposes?
Yes.
And in this instance, did you request a toxicology be done on the decedent's blood?
Yes.
And what kind of toxicology testing did you order?
So we ordered a panel, it's called homicide panel, which basically tests for drugs of abuse.
And we're talking about drugs of abuse. Are you talking about controlled type substances?
Yes, in fact, that's a better term to use.
And is this homicide screening that you speak of commonly known as an H screen?
Yes.
Are you aware of whether this H screen looks for nicotine within the blood?
It does not.
Now, again, before we get into the actual post-mortem examination, were there x-rays taken of this particular decedent's body?
Yes.
Were you able to examine those x-rays?
Yes.
Did you also take a look at the decedent's medical records from Cedars-Sinai?
I don't remember if I had access to the records at the time of the autopsy.
But since then, have you had an opportunity to examine those records?
Yes.
Based on your review of the decedent's medical records from Cedars-Sinai, do you believe that appropriate life-saving measures were taken?
Yes, and based on what I documented at autopsy, yes.
Now, she arrived at Cedars-Sinai at around 2:13 a.m. and was pronounced dead at 3:26 a.m., so about an hour and 15 minutes after her arrival into the hospital. Now, do you believe, based on your review of the medical records and in your experience, that earlier admission into the hospital would have prevented her death?
Well, it's possible. I don't think it's probable.
And why don't you think it's probable?
The injuries sustained, particularly in her liver, were very severe. I trained in the military, and we get questions. If this person was injured right outside an OR, could we have gotten them? Saved them in time? And this is one of those questions where if she was right outside the OR, I don't know. I have my doubts that she would have been able to be resuscitated.
Is this due to the severity of the injuries that you observed post-mortem?
Yes.
Now, I want to talk to you about, again, the post-mortem examination itself. What was her height and weight that you observed upon receipt?
So she's 67 inches, that's 5 foot 7 inches, and 130 pounds.
Was there medical intervention that was apparent on her body?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm holding a diagram, an order diagram. May that be marked as people's next order?
113.
Did you document the evidence of medical intervention that you saw on the decedent's body?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked as people's 113. Do you recognize what's depicted here?
Yes, this is the external examination diagram that I did.
In this external examination diagram, and you're the author of this document?
Yes, I am.
In this external examination diagram, do you document all of the injuries that you observed externally on the decedent's body?
That's a second page that looks exactly like this. It's the same diagram, but to keep things clean so people can follow along, I do the injuries on a separate form, and this is the general characteristics and the medical therapy that she had.
So to be clear, this particular exhibit, People's 113, documents the general observations as well as the medical intervention that you saw.
Yes.
Now, you referred in your testimony that there is a separate diagram that you use to keep things cleaner.
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the people are holding a similar diagram with the title Wounds at the top. May that be marked as People's 114?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked as People's 114. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Again, are you the author of this document?
Yes, I am.
And explain the difference between People's 113 and People's 114, which I've just displayed for you on the screen.
So this one, as it says at the top of the diagram, it says wounds. So these are the wounds that I saw on the external examination. And they're specifically for the torso and the extremities. You can see I have squares drawn around the head and both hands because I have different diagrams for those areas.
Now, I want to talk to you about any observations that you had made to the face area. Did you make any sort of observations regarding injuries to her face?
Yes, she had injuries of her face.
Could you please describe the injuries that you saw on her face?
Before I do, Your Honor, is it okay if I refer to my notes?
Certainly. Just let us know when you need to.
So she had a cluster of abrasions over her left forehead, and a cluster of abrasions in front of her right ear, an abrasion on her right cheek, contusion on her right cheek, an abrasion along the lower right jaw, an abrasion of her nose, 2 linear abrasions, so just they're like lines, scrapes of lines, on her left cheek, as well as an irregular abrasion. Behind her left ear, she had a cluster of abrasions and contusions. And do we want to talk about her neck, or are we just going to talk about her face?
Just her face.
Okay, so those are the injuries that I saw on her face.
Did you observe any injuries around her eye area specifically?
Well, injury, no. But what she did have was what we call petechiae. So these are small, broken blood vessels in the skin that we can see. And when we see that, it's a clue that there may have been some form of asphyxiation, some form of strangulation going on. And so when we do that, that directs me that I'm going to do a specific examination on her neck when we do the internal examination.
So your external examination revealed these petechial hemorrhages in the victim's eyes.
Yes, and just to clarify why these are associated with strangulation is because pressure is applied usually to the neck in an area that collapses the jugular veins, but blood still goes into the head through the carotid arteries. And so, but it doesn't go through the jugular veins to return to the heart. So blood just builds up in those blood vessels, and those blood vessels will break, and we see them as these small little petechiae, little pinpoint hemorrhages in her skin.
So just to be clear, petechial hemorrhaging is consistent with strangulation.
It's a clue to strangulation. There are other things that can cause it, but it's a clue, and that means, again, we needed to take a closer look in the internal examination on her, particularly her neck.
Now I want to talk to you about the internal injuries that you observed to the face area of the decedent. What sort of injuries did you notice in the internal examination of the decedent's face?
So just to be clear, when I say face, I'm basically talking between the eyes and the chin. So I did not see facial injuries because we don't remove the skin of the face when we do the autopsy. We do look at the skin, we do reflect the skin of the scalp, and I did see some hemorrhage, what we call subgaleal hemorrhage, on the right parietal scalp. So if you take your hand and if you put your hand on the side of your head, that's your parietal scalp. And there was a large hemorrhage, about 15 by 15 centimeters on that side of the head.
Now before we get specifically more into the head injury that you just described, I know earlier that you talked about there being x-rays that were taken of the decedent.
Yes.
Based on your examination of the x-rays, were there any sort of fractures or anything like that to the face area of the decedent?
In our x-rays at the coroner's office, I did not see facial fractures. However, x-rays that were obtained prior, I think in the hospital, demonstrate facial fractures.
And what kind of fractures did you notice?
So I said facial fractures. So basically the maxilla, the sinuses. If you take your fingers and you put underneath your eyes, your cheekbones, there are fractures there.
Was there a nasal fracture?
I don't remember.
With looking at those
Yes,
x-rays,
yes.
refresh your recollection?
Yes.
You're on with the court's permission?
Yes.
So yes, there were.
Now, taking into account these nasal injuries, the nasal fracture in particular, would you say that those injuries are consistent with being punched in the face?
I don't object to that. It's fine for speculation.
It's the stain. I mean, you could. One question is what may have caused it. What things could cause it? Unforced trauma. I don't know. I don't know what he's going to be able to answer. How are you going to phrase the question?
Hence the question: is it consistent with that type of?
I don't know about punch, but what could cause those type of injuries to the face?
A punch is among the things that could cause those injuries. Certainly.
Among the things.
Among
Right?
other things, falling on your face could
Okay.
potentially cause those.
Thank you. Sure.
Would you expect to see a nasal fracture after being struck in the face?
I would not be surprised. You don't necessarily have to have a nasal fracture, but if you have one, after I was told the person was struck in the face, I would not be surprised.
Would bleeding from the nose be consistent with being struck in the face?
Yes.
If the decedent were to fall face first onto the pavement from 21 feet, would you expect to see a different pattern of injuries to the face?
Well, I would expect to see a wider pattern of injuries. So these injuries to her face are rather focal. So they cover small areas of her head, her cheeks, her jawline. They're very focal. But if she were to fall and smack her face on the pavement, I would expect some wider injuries covering wider areas over her face. And that's why I talk about that subgaleal hemorrhage over the parietal scalp, because that was so large. That's consistent. That covers a large area of her scalp. And so that's consistent with her head striking the pavement.
Now you've talked about an injury to her head, so let's segue to the observations you made of the decedent's head. Let's talk about the external injuries that you observed to the head first. What external injuries did you observe?
So again, there was a cluster of abrasions to her forehead. And then the other ones were those facial injuries that we discussed already.
Now, you've referenced one of the internal injuries, and that is the kind of wide subgaleal hemorrhage?
Yes.
You got it. So the subgaleal hemorrhage to the scalp. And you were using your right hand to point to the right sort of rear portion of your head. Is that the correct area?
I'd say the right middle portion of your head.
Okay.
Would be correct with the parietal scalp.
And let the record reflect that the witness has touched the right middle side of his, the top of his right portion of his head. Were there other types of injuries that you saw internally in regards to the decedent's head?
So she actually did not have, that I saw, skull fractures of the calvarium or the bowl of the skull or the base of the skull. She did have subdural hemorrhage. So that's hemorrhage over the brain and the dura membrane. And that's a membrane that covers the brain, kind of protecting it from in its cavity. And there was hemorrhage there, and there was subarachnoid hemorrhage. That's another membrane that covers the brain, and so there was hemorrhage in that as well.
Now, are the injuries you observed to the head what you would describe as injuries, blunt force injuries?
Yes.
Would you say that those injuries observed to the head, internal injuries, are consistent with a fall?
They can be, yes.
Do you believe that those injuries are consistent with being struck in the head?
They could be as well.
Now, based on the totality of the victim's injuries that you observed throughout your entire post-mortem examination, does it appear more likely that those head injuries are consistent with a fall rather than that of being struck?
The ones to her face, I think, are more consistent with her being struck. That injury to the side of her scalp, I think, is more consistent with the fall.
And is that because of the wide pattern of injuries that you described?
Yes.
Could the injuries to her head have caused the decedent to seize immediately after falling?
Yes.
Now, you had already stated you did not observe any skull fractures to the decedent's head. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, if the decedent were to fall from 21 feet head first, would you expect her head to absorb most of the impact?
If head first, yes.
Now, I understand, well, let me ask you this. Are the head injuries that you observed internally lethal?
Lethal? They
Yes.
can be, yes.
Now, if the decedent were to fall from 21 feet head first onto the pavement, would you expect to see skull fractures?
I would, yes, I would expect to see skull fractures. I would be surprised if there weren't.
Now, I want to turn your attention to the torso area of the victim. Did you observe external injuries to the torso area of the decedent?
Yes.
And what were those injuries that you observed externally?
So she has a cluster of, so we're going to talk about the torso specifically. Right?
Correct.
A cluster of abrasions and contusions on her right chest, a smaller abrasion on the mid-right chest, a large contusion, well, a 4 by 2 centimeter contusion on the lower right chest, an abrasion on the proximal right thigh. So the closer right thigh hip area, where you bend your thigh, that's about the area she had an abrasion at. She had some abrasions on her left chest and a circular pattern abrasion.
What is appears to be reading from his...
Yes, you're right.
All right. Okay. Just advise the court you need to refer to your report. All right.
Yes, sir.
All right.
And a circular pattern abrasion on her abdomen, left side of her abdomen.
Now, are those injuries that you notice externally documented in People's 114 on the screen?
Yes.
Now, I want to turn your attention to the internal injuries of the torso. What were those injuries?
So she had blood in her abdomen. I want to point out she also had blood in her chest, but there were no injuries in her chest. I think that blood that I saw in her chest was therapy related. She had what they call a chest tube inserted in the right side of her chest. Because they didn't know what was going on, so they tried to relieve any kind of...
We object to this last part as not responsive.
Okay. The last part will be stricken. But you think that they are related to medical treatment?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then she had pelvic fractures as well, and multiple lacerations of her liver, lacerations of the mesentery. So those are the blood vessels that feed your intestines, and a laceration of her right kidney as well.
Now, would you call those injuries that you just talked about in regards to the internal injuries of the decedent's torso to be lethal?
Yes.
Referring you specifically to the lacerations of the liver, was that caused by the extent of the impact to the decedent's body?
From the fall?
From a fall?
From a fall. Yes, most likely.
And in order for that type of injury to occur, would there have to be an immense amount of impact?
Yes, a large amount of energy.
Are the injuries that you observe to the torso consistent with that from a fall?
Yes.
Are the injuries to the torso consistent with that of being struck?
Not particularly the liver and the pelvic injuries are not. And the laceration of the kidney are not consistent with being struck.
Why is that?
First off, the liver would take to have that kind of injury, so multiple lacerations, breaking there's a capsule around the liver, and to shatter that would take an immense amount of force. I would only expect to see something like that in a motor vehicle accident, in a motor vehicle collision. The pelvic injury she had, again, would take a lot of force as well. And again, I would only expect to see that other than a fall in a motor vehicle collision. And again, the mesentery, the laceration of the right kidney is similarly, it's kind of protected. The kidney is kind of protected behind your back and away from your intestines. So again, a lot of energy would have to have been applied to that. You can see most of the injuries, there's no injuries on her back, but like I said, the kidney is near the back. And so for a blow to from a fist or an object to her abdomen would not cause injury to, I would not expect that to cause injury to her kidney.
So in your opinion, the severity of injuries to the torso are more consistent with that of a fall than that of being struck?
Yes.
Now I want to talk to you about the pelvis in particular. You were able to examine some x-rays, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, the extent of the injury to her pelvis, both on the right and left of the pelvis, is consistent with the decedent falling onto her pelvis. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I want to talk to you about the injuries the decedent suffered to her scapula. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. What is that?
So the scapula is your shoulder blade. And so I did not see it on the x-rays we have. It's, for me, I'm not a radiologist. Seeing scapular fractures are not easy for me to find. However, the prior x-rays did see imaging studies did see the fracture of the spine.
This is hearsay.
No, overruled. He's very experienced and he relies on reports. You said to the spine?
Spine of her scapula. So
Alright.
there's a ridge on that bone, and that was fractured.
Now, in order for that injury to occur, does there need to be, again, an immense amount of force applied?
Yes.
Is that type of injury that you observed to the scapula consistent with that of being struck?
I would be hard to imagine being struck with fists, maybe with a baseball bat or a pipe, but I would have a hard time seeing that happen with fists.
So is that injury that you observed to the scapula, that fracture, consistent with a fall?
Yes.
Is that injury that you observed to the decedent's scapula more consistent with the decedent falling on the right side of her body onto the pavement?
I don't think we said what side it was. It was her right scapula, so yes, that is the side.
Now I want to talk to you about her neck area. Were there external injuries you observed on her neck area?
Yes, there were.
And what were those injuries?
So she had, sir, I'm going to refer to my notes before I answer.
Your Honor, is that okay?
Yes.
So, cluster of abrasions on the right side of her neck. She had some abrasions on the left side of her neck. So if you were to follow that sternocleidomastoid muscle, she had a cluster of abrasions above that muscle, and then below that muscle was a cluster of contusions there.
At this time, Your Honor, the people are holding a diagram. May that be marked as people's necks in order of the head?
I think you're at 115.
I'm showing you what's been marked as people's 115. Does this diagram, a diagram that was authored by you?
Yes.
And does this document the external head and neck injuries that you've been referring to?
Yes.
Now you talk about some external injuries to the neck. I'm showing you what's been previously marked as people's 44, 31, 32, 44, and 45. I'll do it a little quickly here. I'm showing you people's 31. $32, 44, and 45.
Yes.
Do those accurately document the external injuries you observed to the victim's neck?
Yes.
Now, did you also conduct an internal examination of the decedent's neck?
Yes.
Did you observe any internal injuries to her neck?
Yes. So, as I was saying, because of a petechiae, we did what we call anterior neck dissection. And we take all the muscles. We have about 6 muscles on each, 4 muscles on each side of the neck. And we reflect all those muscles and look for injury. So I found a hemorrhage in the right sternocleidomastoid muscle and hemorrhage in her left sternohyoid muscle.
Your Honor, at this time I'm holding 2 photos, post-mortem examination photos of the decedent's neck area. May that be marked as people's 116 A and B?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked as people's 116A. Do you recognize what's depicted here?
So this is a picture of her neck taken from the left side after we've done that muscle reflection.
And is the only way to observe the injuries that you just described to the jury by conducting an actual post-mortem examination looking inside the neck area of the decedent?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
You described the internal injuries that you observed in the decedent.
Yes.
Are you only able to see those injuries if you cut open the body and see it?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked as people's 116, and you could use, there's a wooden pointer behind you. The internal injuries, could you point out the internal injuries you observed to the decedent?
So you can, oh, that's not, there is hemorrhage here and there is hemorrhage here. However, that hemorrhage is what we call fascial hemorrhage. It's not in the muscle itself. So I had to disregard that because that can just be artifact of medical intervention. Perhaps they put a needle or try to put an IV in that area. But there's hemorrhage right here in her sternohyoid muscle, this muscle right here. And there's hemorrhage right here. And that's the injury that I saw on the left side of her neck.
That's close to the jaw area, is it not?
Yes, sir.
All right.
I'm showing you what's been marked as People's 116B. Is this the right side neck area of the decedent?
Yes, it is.
Could you describe the internal injuries you observed here?
Again, this hemorrhage is a fascial hemorrhage. It's not within any muscle. It could be artifact. But here's her sternocleidomastoid muscle. Again, it's a big flap of a muscle. And you can see the hemorrhage, a lot of hemorrhage within that muscle.
Now, based on your observation of these internal injuries and the external injuries to the neck area of the decedent, would you say that these injuries are consistent with manual strangulation?
Yes.
Now, are these injuries consistent with strangulation by one or both hands?
I can't tell you. There's no pattern for me to determine which hand was grabbing there. Sometimes the fingernails may grip into the skin and leave a pattern, but I didn't see anything with the neck injuries.
Now, earlier you talked about how petechial hemorrhages are a clue to strangulation.
Yes.
Now, taking into account that you observed petechial hemorrhages on the decedent and observed these external and internal injuries, which we testified about, are you able to come to the opinion that the decedent was strangled?
Yes, I believe so.
Now, I want to ask you some general questions about strangulation. Could strangulation cause the decedent to lose control of her bowel movements?
If she lost conscience, I would suspect that she could lose control of her bowel and bladder.
So could strangulation of the decedent, if she lost consciousness, cause her to also urinate?
Yes.
Now, given enough pressure to the trachea, would strangulation prevent a victim from yelling or screaming?
It would take a lot of pressure to prevent on the trachea, so that's your windpipe. It would take a lot of pressure, about 33 pounds of pressure. I realize that's technical talk, but it's a lot of pressure to actually close off the trachea entirely. But it would compromise it in a way that would make it difficult to yell.
So it would make it difficult to yell or scream?
Right, but not impossible.
How long would it take someone to lose consciousness as a result of being strangled?
So it's about 15 to 20 seconds.
Now, if the decedent was physically assaulted, struck in the head repeatedly, strangled for up to 15 to 20 seconds, is it likely that the decedent was unconscious after being strangled?
I think it's very possible.
Even if the decedent was not strangled to the point of unconsciousness, would you anticipate her physical condition to be in such a weakened state if she were first physically assaulted and then strangled?
Well, she's in a...
That's also speculation.
Well, would you be speculating in your answer, sir?
Yes, sir, I would.
Okay, sustain.
Would you expect the decedent to expend a lot of energy if she had been strangled?
Yes.
That is vague.
What do you understand that question to be posing, sir? Exert a lot of energy.
Would she be fatigued, is how I'm
But is that the
interpreting.
way you meant it? Fatigued?
Yes.
Okay.
I could ask that question as well. Do you want me to make
So
it clear?
Are you saying, what did you ask the question again?
Sure. Would you expect the decedent to be fatigued after being strangled?
Yes.
Now, I want to talk about the shoulders. Are there injuries that you observed to the shoulders?
Yes.
And what were those injuries that you observed to the shoulders?
So I'm going to look at my notes before I...
All right.
So she had an abrasion on her anterior right shoulder, but more interestingly to me, it was a patterned contusion on the front of her right shoulder, and then she had a patterned contusion on the back of her right shoulder. So the one on the front shoulder was oval shaped, but had clearing in the center of that oval. The one on the back of the shoulder was circular shaped, but it had clearing again in the back of the shoulder. So this is on the right shoulder again. So my thoughts is that this is some kind of grasping motion where fingers are pressing, finger and thumb are pressing on the shoulders. What that does is cause the blood right under the skin where the thumb and finger are being applied rushes out, and it breaks the blood vessels surrounding where that impression is. So that's why you have that clearing in the center, but blood around it.
Now I want to talk to you about her hands. Did you observe any injuries to the decedent's hands?
Yes.
And what were those injuries that you observed?
Again, sir, I need to review a lot of it. There were a lot of injuries to her hands. So she had a lot of contusions on her fingers, on her knuckles. So they're all contusions. Well, there is some abrasions on her knuckles, but she also had abrasions on the back and the sides of her hands, both hands.
Okay. Now I want to show you some photos. What's been previously marked as people's 47, 48, 49, 50, and 51, and I'll go through them quickly. 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, and I'd like to mark another photo, Your Honor, as people's next in order,
17.
Showing you what's been marked as people's 117. Do you recognize this photograph?
Yes, was taken by the autopsy tech prior to the autopsy.
And does this also document the injury that you observed to the decedent's hand?
Yes, and just to point out, if you look at all the knuckles, her middle finger, ring finger, and little finger all have bruises on the knuckles, so what we call the proximal interphalangeal joint, but the closer knuckle.
Show you the the 6 photos of the hands that I just showed you. Does that accurately document the injuries that you observed to the decedent's hands?
Yes.
Are those injuries that you observed consistent with assaultive type wounds?
They can be. Those that are on the knuckles, if you imagine throwing a punch, and the first thing that's going to hit the object you're punching are your knuckles. So those contusions on the knuckles would be an assaultive type of injury.
Are those injuries you observed to the decedent's hands consistent with defensive types of injuries?
So the ones on the backs of her hands and the sides of her hands are more consistent with her trying to block any blows that were coming her way.
And would you?
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
and I would like to add that you can see that in the external diagram on the torso, but she had injuries farther up her forearms and on her arms too, also consistent with blocking those blows.
Your Honor, I have another diagram that have been marked as equals 118.
Yes.
And showing you what's been marked as equals 118, is this a document that's authored by you?
Yes.
And again, do these document the injuries that you observed to the decedent's hands?
Yes.
Now, you talked about these injuries or being consistent with someone holding up their hands. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you would expect to see these injuries if someone was attempting to defend themselves?
Yes.
Now, if the decedent were to brace herself from a fall from 21 feet hitting the pavement by holding out her hands, would you expect to see a different pattern of injuries than the ones you've notated?
Well, if she's assuming that she's landing on her palms, I would expect some kind of injury to the palms. Now, the palms take a lot of pressure to cause injury, but I would suspect that a fall from a height would be adequate to cause injuries to the palms.
Did you see any injuries to the palms?
I did not.
Were there any fractures to her hands?
There were no fractures to her hands or forearms or arms.
Now, did you observe injuries to the decedent's legs?
Yes, she had similar abrasions and contusions on her extremities, lower extremities.
Now, if the decedent were to fall from a height of 21 feet and land feet first, would you expect to see a different pattern of injuries than what you observed from the decedent?
Yes, and as I was studying for this case, there was a classic picture in one of my textbooks
This is non-responsive.
of an individual who falls onto their feet and causes lacerations, so breaks in the skin of the soles of the feet, and then the lower extremity bones, the tibia and the fibula, are driven through the feet, through those injuries on the feet. I did not see that in this case.
Now, based upon your examination of the decedent, are you able to determine the cause of death?
Yes.
What is the basis of your conclusion?
All those injuries we've been discussing throughout the whole testimony.
And what is her cause of death?
So blunt force injuries of the head and torso.
And what is her manner of death?
Homicide.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Cross-examination. Who's cross-examining?
I am.
We'll start tomorrow at 9:30
Your Honor, may we approach about scheduling with the witness?
with the, sure.
More of the trial of the Hollywood sex therapist killer is on the way. Press subscribe now so you don't miss a moment of this riveting courtroom drama as we seek justice for Dr. Amie Harwick.